The envelope was cream-colored, standard legal size. Nothing special about it at all. But when Derek's fingers touched the paper, his smile collapsed like a house built on sand. I sat across from him in that wood-paneled conference room, my hands folded in my lap, my face arranged into the expression I'd worn for 17 months. Grief, exhaustion, the look of a widow who'd lost everything. Derek had been grinning since he walked through the door of Morrison and Associates that morning. Not the polite, subdued smile you'd expect at the reading of your father's will. No. This was the smile of a man who'd already won. He'd been so certain. Attorney James Morrison cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and said the words that made Derek's face go white. "There's one additional item, Mr. Wells. Your father left specific instructions that this envelope be delivered to you personally, to be opened only in the presence of Mrs. Thornton Wells and myself." Derek's wife, Vanessa, leaned forward in her chair. "What is this? This wasn't mentioned before." "No," Morrison said calmly. "It wasn't. Before I continue, I need you to understand something. I'm not a vengeful person. I spent 31 years as a corporate accountant before I married Richard Wells. Numbers were my language. Precision was my comfort. I believed in systems, in processes, in the quiet satisfaction of everything balancing at the end of the day. I also believed in family, in loyalty, in the idea that if you loved someone's child as your own, eventually that love would be returned. I was wrong about that last part." Derek tore open the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I watched his eyes move across the words, watched the color drain from his face, starting at his forehead and sliding down like water. "This is..." He looked up at Morrison. "This isn't possible. I assure you, Mr. Wells, everything your father documented is quite possible, and quite legal." Vanessa snatched the paper from Derek's hands. She read it once, then again. Then she turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Fear. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew this whole time." I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small silver key. The key to a storage unit on the outskirts of Charlotte that Derek had spent 17 months trying to find. "Richard always said the truth has a way of surfacing," I said quietly, "even when people think they've buried it deep enough." Derek stood up so fast his chair crashed backward into the wall. "This is fraud. This is... You manipulated him. You manipulated a dying man. Sit down, Mr. Wells." Morrison's voice was sharp now. "Before you say something you'll regret in front of witnesses." But here's the thing about Derek. He'd already said plenty of things he should have regretted. Done plenty of things. He just never thought any of it would catch up to him. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a will anymore. It was about 17 months of lies. 17 months of watching my husband's son smile at me across the dinner table while systematically destroying everything Richard had built. 17 months of being called crazy, paranoid, a grieving widow who couldn't accept that her husband's estate was being properly managed by his only child. They thought I was broken. They thought I was finished. But I'm an accountant, and there's one thing accountants understand better than anyone else in this world. Numbers don't lie. People do. The story of how I ended up in that conference room, how I went from a trusting wife and stepmother to the woman who dismantled her stepson's entire scheme with a single envelope. That story starts 2 years before the will reading. It starts with the night I found Richard unconscious on our bathroom floor. And it ends with me learning that the person who put him there had been living under our roof, eating at our table, and calling me Mom for over a decade. My name is Margaret Thornton Wells. Most people call me Maggie. I was 52 years old when I married Richard Wells. It was the second marriage for both of us. My first husband, Tom, had died of pancreatic cancer 8 years earlier, leaving me with good memories, no children, and a career I'd poured myself into to survive the grief. Richard found me at a charity gala in Charlotte. I was there because my firm had sponsored a table. He was there because his construction company had built the venue. We were seated next to each other by accident, or fate, depending on what you believe. He asked me to dance. I told him I didn't dance. He said neither did he, but the band was playing Sinatra, and it seemed like a waste not to try. We tried. 2 years later, we were married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. His son Derek, then 28, stood as best man. Derek's wife Vanessa held my bouquet during the vows. I remember thinking that day how lucky I was, not just to have found love again at my age, but to have gained a family in the process. Richard talked about Derek constantly, how proud he was, how hard Derek had worked to prove himself at Wells Construction, how Derek had inherited his mother's charm and his father's work ethic. "He's a good kid," Richard would say. "Heart of gold." I wanted to believe that. I really did. The first few years were good. Derek and Vanessa came to Sunday dinners. We spent holidays together. When their daughter Emma was born, I cried in the hospital waiting room like she was my own granddaughter. Richard's business was thriving. He'd built Wells Construction from nothing, literally from the back of a pickup truck and a willingness to work 18-hour days. By the time I met him, the company was worth just over $40 million. Not a fortune by billionaire standards, but enough to matter, enough to change lives, enough to make people do things they wouldn't normally do. I didn't see the cracks at first. Or maybe I did, but I explained them away the way you do when you love someone and want their family to love you back. Like the time Derek forgot to include me in the family photo at Emma's christening, or the way Vanessa would stiffen slightly whenever I touched her daughter, or how Derek's visits became shorter and more transactional after Richard started talking about retirement. "He's just busy," Richard would say. "The company's growing. He's got a lot on his plate." I nodded. I smiled. I told myself that step-families were complicated, and these things took time. But here's the first anomaly I should have paid attention to. It was a Thursday evening, about 14 months before Richard's stroke. We were sitting on the back patio, watching the sunset over the lake behind our house. Richard was quieter than usual. He'd been that way for a few weeks, distracted, checking his phone more often, disappearing into his study to make calls. I asked him if everything was okay. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said something strange. "Maggie, if anything ever happens to me, I need you to promise me something." I set down my wine glass. "Richard, what's going on?" "Promise me you'll check the numbers. All of them. Don't let anyone tell you it's not your place." He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Something that looked like fear. "You're the only one I trust to see what's really there." "Richard, you're scaring me." He reached over and took my hand, squeezed it. "I'm probably being paranoid. Forget I said anything." But I didn't forget. I couldn't. That conversation lived in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. Richard went back to his normal self, laughing, affectionate, obsessed with his golf game and his granddaughter's first steps. I told myself I'd imagined the fear in his eyes. Then came the second anomaly. This one I witnessed myself. It was a Sunday, 3 weeks after that conversation on the patio. Derek and Vanessa had come for dinner, and we were all gathered in the living room while Emma played on the floor. Richard excused himself to take a call in his study. I was in the kitchen, getting more coffee, when I heard raised voices. I moved closer to the study door. Not to eavesdrop, just to make sure everything was okay. "Not your decision to make," Richard was saying. His voice was tight, controlled. But underneath that control was something harder, something I'd never heard directed at Derek. "Dad, I'm trying to protect the company. Someone has to think about the future here. The future is my concern. Mine. And your job is to do what I tell you, not to go behind my back and—" The voices dropped. I couldn't make out the rest. When Richard emerged from the study 10 minutes later, his face was arranged into a pleasant smile. Derek followed, clapping him on the shoulder like nothing had happened. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," Richard said. "Just business." Derek met my eyes for just a moment, and in that moment, before he looked away, I saw something I'd never noticed before. Contempt, not for Richard, for me. That night, after Derek and Vanessa had gone home, I found Richard in his study. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a spreadsheet on his computer screen. "What happened earlier?" I asked. "And don't tell me it's nothing." He closed the laptop, slowly, deliberately. "Derek wants to restructure some of the company's holdings. Move things around. I'm not sure it's the right move." "What kind of restructuring?" "Complicated. Financial. You'd probably understand it better than I would." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's nothing for you to worry about." I sat down across from him. "Richard, you told me to check the numbers. What numbers?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small brass key. "There's a storage unit off Highway 74, Unit 7B. If anything happens to me, anything at all, I need you to go there." He pressed the key into my palm. "Don't tell anyone. Not Derek. Not Vanessa. No one." "Richard, what is going on?" "I'm probably wrong," he said. "I hope I am. But just in case I'm not—" He closed my fingers around the key. "You're the only person I trust, Maggie. The only one." I put the key in my jewelry box that night, hidden under the velvet lining behind the pearls my mother had given me. I told myself Richard was being dramatic, that he was worried about the business, about getting older, about all the things men worry about when they realize they can't work forever. 3 months later, I found him on the bathroom floor. The doctors called it a massive hemorrhagic stroke. They said it was unpredictable, a ticking time bomb in his brain that no one could have seen coming. Richard was 64 years old. He'd never had high blood pressure, never had a single warning sign. But the brain, they told me, was a mysterious thing. Sometimes these things just happened. I sat by his hospital bed for 19 days. Derek came every afternoon, right on schedule. He brought flowers. He held his father's hand. He told the nurses what a wonderful man Richard had been. He used past tense before the machines were even turned off. On the 20th day, the doctors told me there was nothing more they could do. Richard died at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. I was holding his hand. Derek was in the hallway, talking to someone on his phone. The funeral was 3 days later. 400 people came. Business associates, friends, employees who'd worked for Richard for decades. They all said the same thing. He was a good man. Honest. Fair. The kind of boss you didn't see anymore. Derek gave the eulogy. He talked about his father's legacy, His dedication to family, his belief that hard work could conquer anything. He didn't mention me once. After the service, while everyone gathered at the reception, Derek pulled me aside. "We should talk," he said. "About the estate, about Dad's wishes." I was still wearing black, still numb, still trying to understand how my husband had been alive 3 weeks ago and was now being lowered into the ground. "Not now," I said. "Please." Derek's hand tightened on my arm, just slightly, just enough to leave a bruise I'd find the next morning. "There's no good time for these conversations, Margaret." He'd stopped calling me Mom the day Richard had his stroke. "But they have to happen. Dad would have wanted things handled quickly, efficiently. Then we'll talk to the lawyers next week." "Actually," Derek smiled, that smile I would come to recognize, the smile that meant he was about to take something from me. "I've already spoken with Morrison. He says the will is straightforward. Dad left the business to me. The house and remaining assets to you, of course, but the company. I know what Richards will said." "Good. Then you understand why we need to move forward. The company needs leadership, continuity. The employees are nervous. Clients are asking questions." I looked at my stepson. At this man I'd tried so hard to love for over a decade. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Derek?" "Nothing complicated. Just sign a few documents, transfer of authority stuff, so I can start running things properly." He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times. "Morrison can have the paperwork ready tomorrow. We can get this all sorted before the reading of the will even happens. Before the reading of the will." He wanted me to sign documents before the will was officially read. That's when I noticed it. The eagerness in his eyes, the way he was leaning forward, like a predator who'd spotted wounded prey. The slight tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with grief. He wasn't mourning. He was hungry. "No," I said. Derek blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no. I'm not signing anything until I've had time to review it with my own attorney. "Margaret, that's not necessary. Morrison has been Dad's lawyer for 20 years. He knows—" "No." I pulled my arm free from his grip. "We'll do this properly, through official channels, after I've had time to grieve my husband." Something shifted in Derek's face. The mask slipped, just for a second. Underneath was something cold, something that had been waiting a very long time. "Fine," he said. "We'll do it your way." He walked away without another word. That night, alone in the house that still smelled like Richard's aftershave, I went to my jewelry box and pulled out the brass key. I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed now, and turned it over in my hands. "Check the numbers," Richard had said. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard on that bathroom floor, saw Derek smile at the funeral, saw the contempt in his eyes that Sunday afternoon. The next morning, something was different, not in the world, in me. Grief was still there, that hollow ache that would never fully go away. But underneath it, something else was waking up. Something that had spent 31 years reading balance sheets and tracking discrepancies. Something that knew, deep in its bones, that none of this added up. I made myself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and did what I'd been trained to do my entire professional life. I made a list. Richard's sudden warnings, the argument with Derek, the stroke that came out of nowhere. Derek's eagerness to get documents signed before the official reading. The way he'd stopped calling me Mom. Individually, each item could be explained away. Together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I looked at the brass key in my hand. Then I got dressed and drove to Highway 74. The storage unit was in a facility called Secure Space, sandwiched between a tire shop and an abandoned furniture store. The kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. Which, I realized, was probably the point. Unit 7B was at the end of a long corridor, away from the other units. I stood in front of the metal door for a full minute before inserting the key. What I found inside changed everything. The unit was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead. The walls were bare concrete. But in the center of the room sat a metal filing cabinet. Industrial, heavy, the kind that could survive a fire. On top of the filing cabinet was a sealed envelope with my name written in Richard's handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter. Maggie, if you're reading this, then I was right to be worried. And I'm sorry. I should have told you everything, but I was hoping I was wrong, hoping that my own son wasn't capable of what I suspected. I've spent the last 6 months gathering evidence, bank records, emails, documents. Everything you'll need is in this filing cabinet. The combination is our wedding date, the day you saved me. Derek has been stealing from the company for 3 years. At first it was small amounts, easy to overlook. But over the past year, it's accelerated. He's been moving money through shell companies, falsifying invoices, manipulating contracts. As of last month, he's taken nearly $4 million. But that's not the worst part. I confronted him, told him I knew, gave him a chance to come clean, to make it right. He looked me in the eye and told me I was confused, getting old, losing my mind. Then he started talking about having me declared incompetent. Maggie, I don't know what he's planning. I don't know how far he'll go, but I know my son, the son I raised, the son I loved, is not the man standing in front of me anymore. I've updated my will. Morrison has the new version locked in his safe. The one Derek knows about is from 3 years ago. It leaves everything to him. The real will leaves everything to you. Use what's in this cabinet. Protect yourself. And don't trust anyone. Not Morrison's office staff, not our employees, not anyone who might be loyal to Derek. I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you myself. Richard. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat down on the cold concrete floor and cried. But here's the thing about accountants. Even when we're crying, part of our brain is still calculating, still categorizing, still building the case that will eventually bring order to chaos. Richard had given me a weapon. Now I needed to learn how to use it. I opened the filing cabinet. Inside were 13 folders, each one labeled and dated in Richard's meticulous handwriting. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, copies of forged invoices, screenshots of emails between Derek and someone named V. Garrett, a name I didn't recognize, photographs of Derek meeting with people I'd never seen before, and at the very bottom of the cabinet, a small digital recorder. I pressed play. Derek's voice filled the storage unit. Don't care how you do it, just make it happen. The old man's getting suspicious. We need to accelerate the timeline. Another voice, male, older, familiar. If we push too fast, there'll be questions. You want this to look natural, right? I want it done, by the end of the month, whatever it takes. The recording ended. I stared at the device in my hands. Whatever it takes. My husband hadn't died of natural causes. My stepson had killed him. And now I had proof. I didn't go to the police that day. I know that's what most people would have done. March straight to the authorities. Play them the recording. Demand justice. But I'd spent 31 years working with numbers, with evidence, with the painstaking process of building a case that couldn't be dismantled by a clever attorney or a well-placed bribe. One recording wasn't enough, not by itself. Derek would claim it was fabricated, taken out of context. The desperate invention of a grieving widow trying to steal her stepson's inheritance. I needed more. I needed everything. So I did what any good accountant would do when faced with a complicated audit. I made a plan. Step 1. Secure the evidence. I photographed every document in that storage unit, made digital copies of everything, stored backups in 3 separate locations, a safety deposit box at a bank Derek didn't know about, an encrypted cloud drive, and a flash drive that I hid in the lining of my winter coat. Step 2. Identify the players. Who was V. Garrett? Who was the man on the recording with Derek? How deep did this go? Step 3. Find a lawyer, not Morrison. Richard had trusted him, but Richard had also told me not to trust anyone in Morrison's office. I needed someone outside Derek's sphere of influence. Step 4. Document everything going forward, every conversation, every interaction, every move Derek made. I stayed calm. I needed proof. The first few weeks were a performance. I played the grieving widow perfectly, fragile, confused, overwhelmed by the complexity of Richard's estate. I signed the documents Derek put in front of me. Not the important ones, never the ones that would transfer real power, but enough to make him think I was cooperating. I let him think he'd won. Meanwhile, I was following the money. V. Garrett turned out to be Vincent Garrett, a private contractor who specialized in consulting services for construction companies. His actual job, as far as I could tell, was helping people hide money from the IRS and their business partners. Derek had been using him for 3 years. The payments were clever. Disguised as legitimate business expenses, equipment purchases, consulting fees, subcontractor payments for projects that didn't exist. Small enough to slip past casual review, large enough to add up to millions over time. But Richard had found them, traced them back to their source, documented everything with the precision of a man who'd built a company from nothing and knew every penny that moved through its accounts. I spent 2 weeks going through the files in the storage unit, cross-referencing dates, building spreadsheets, creating a timeline of every theft, every forged document, every suspicious transaction. By the end of that process, I had a clear picture of what Derek had done, but I still didn't know how Richard had died. The recording haunted me. Whatever it takes. What did that mean? Had Derek hired someone to hurt Richard? Had he done it himself? I needed answers, which meant I needed to find the other voice on that recording. It took me a week. I listened to that clip hundreds of times trying to place the voice. Something about it was familiar. The cadence, the slight southern drawl, the way he emphasized certain words. Then it hit me. Dr. Paul Emerson, Richard's physician for the past 15 years, a respected internist with a practice in Myers Park. The doctor who'd done Richard's annual physical 3 months before his stroke and declared him in excellent health for a man his age. The doctor who'd told me at the hospital that sometimes these things just happen. I didn't want to believe it, but I'd stopped believing in coincidences the day I found that storage unit. The next morning, I called Dr. Emerson's office and made an appointment. Told them I was having trouble sleeping since my husband's death. Needed something to help with the anxiety. He saw me 2 days later. His office was exactly what you'd expect. Warm lighting, leather chairs, diplomas on the wall. He shook my hand with practiced sympathy and asked how I was holding up. "It's been hard," I said. Richard's death was so sudden. These things are never easy. He guided me to a chair across from his desk. Hemorrhagic strokes are unpredictable, even in otherwise healthy patients. That's what the neurologist said. But I paused, letting my voice catch. It doesn't make sense to me. He was so healthy. No warning signs at all. Something flickered in Emerson's eyes. Just for a second. Then his professional mask was back in place. The brain is complex, Mrs. Wells. Sometimes there are factors we can't predict. Like what? Blood pressure fluctuations, undiagnosed aneurysms, even stress can play a role. He pulled out a prescription pad. Now, about your sleep issues. Doctor, can I ask you something? He stopped writing. Of course. Were there any medications that Richard was taking that could have contributed? Made him more susceptible? The pen trembled in his hand. Just slightly. Just enough. All of Richard's medications were carefully monitored. There was nothing in his regimen that would have caused or contributed to a stroke. I found some pills in his medicine cabinet, I said. Something I didn't recognize. White pills in a small container. No label. Dr. Emerson's face went pale. I'm sure they were just supplements, he said. Richard was always trying various vitamins and herbs. Nothing that would... Dr. Emerson. I leaned forward. What were those pills? He stood up abruptly. Mrs. Wells, I think we're done for today. I'll have my nurse call in a prescription for Ambien. Standard dosage. Take it as needed. Doctor, please. His voice was sharp now, almost panicked. I have other patients waiting. He couldn't get me out of his office fast enough. That's when I knew I was right. Dr. Emerson was involved. He'd given Richard something that had caused or contributed to that stroke, and Derek had paid him to do it. What I found in those pills made my stomach drop. I'd lied about finding them in Richard's cabinet. There were no pills. But Emerson's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Now I just had to prove it. The problem was, I was an accountant, not a medical investigator. I knew numbers, not pharmacology. I needed help, which meant I needed to trust someone. Richard had told me not to trust anyone. But Richard was also dead, and the only way I was going to get justice was by building a team. I started with a lawyer. Her name was Catherine Park. She was 61 years old, a former federal prosecutor who'd spent 15 years putting white-collar criminals in prison before opening her own practice. She had a reputation for being thorough, relentless, and absolutely uninterested in being paid off. I found her through a network of accountants I'd worked with over the years. One of them, my former colleague Ruth, had used Catherine in a complicated divorce involving hidden assets. If you need someone who will dig until they find bedrock, Ruth told me, Catherine's your woman. I called Catherine's office that afternoon. Her assistant tried to schedule me for 2 weeks out. Tell her it involves fraud, possibly murder, and the suspect is my stepson, I said. I'll be at her office in an hour. Catherine Park saw me 20 minutes after I arrived. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her office was lined with filing cabinets and law books and the kind of organized chaos that I recognized from my own career. Mrs. Thornton Wells, she gestured to a chair. You've made some serious allegations on my answering service. I hope you have something to back them up. I handed her the files, all 13 folders, the recording, the letter from Richard. Give me a few minutes, she said. It was actually 47 minutes. I sat in that chair and watched her read through everything, making notes, occasionally replaying parts of the recording. Her face remained completely neutral throughout. Finally, she looked up. "Do you understand what you're accusing your stepson of?" "Yes." "Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and potentially accessory to murder." "I understand." Catherine leaned back in her chair. "The financial case is solid. Your husband did excellent work documenting everything. With this evidence, we could have Derek charged and convicted within a year. But the murder allegation is more complicated. The recording is suggestive but not conclusive. Whatever it takes could mean a lot of things. And you've identified Dr. Emerson as a potential conspirator, but you have no proof that he actually did anything. Richard was healthy. He had no risk factors for a stroke. And Emerson's reaction when I mentioned pills. I believe you, but believing isn't the same as proving. She tapped her pen against her desk. Here's what I recommend. We pursue two parallel tracks. First, we build the financial case. That's solid. That will put Derek in prison regardless of what else we find. Second, we investigate the medical angle, quietly, without tipping off Emerson or Derek. If there's evidence of foul play in your husband's death, we'll find it. How? I know a private investigator, former FBI. She specializes in cases like this. Catherine smiled thinly. Her name is Denise Monroe. She's very good at finding things people don't want found. I left Catherine's office that afternoon with a retainer agreement and a phone number. 3 days later, I met Denise Monroe. She was not what I expected. I'd been picturing someone hard-edged and intense. Instead, the woman who showed up at my door looked like a suburban mom. Mid-40s, blonde hair and a casual ponytail, wearing jeans and a cardigan. "Mrs. Thornton Wells?" She smiled warmly. "I'm Denise. Catherine sent me." We sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started asking questions. "Tell me about your husband's health before the stroke. Everything you can remember. Doctor's visits, medications, diet, exercise routine." I told her. Everything. The annual physicals. The cholesterol medication he'd been on for years. His golf obsession. The vitamins he took every morning. Did he ever complain about new symptoms? Headaches, dizziness, confusion? Nothing. He was fine. Normal. Until that night. Denise made notes. "Walk me through finding him. Every detail." I closed my eyes. Let myself go back to that night. I'd been out late. A book club meeting that ran over. When I got home, the house was quiet. I assumed Richard was in bed. But when I went upstairs, I paused, breathed. The bathroom light was on. The door was open. He was on the floor. Conscious, but barely. He couldn't speak. Couldn't move his right side. "What did you do?" "Called 911, stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. They took him to Presbyterian. He was in surgery within 2 hours." "Did you talk to the doctors afterward? Did they mention anything unusual?" "Just that the stroke was severe, that there wasn't much they could do." I opened my eyes. I was so focused on Richard, on being there for him. I didn't ask the right questions. Denise nodded slowly. "That's normal. You were in crisis mode. No one expects to play detective when their husband is dying." "I should have." "You did what you needed to do. Now we do the rest." She put down her pen. "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull your husband's medical records, all of them. I'm going to have them reviewed by an independent physician who specializes in stroke cases, and I'm going to take a very close look at Dr. Paul Emerson's finances over the past year." "His finances?" "If he was paid to help kill your husband, the money had to come from somewhere. and it had to go somewhere. She smiled. Money always leaves a trail. You know that better than anyone. I did know that. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt something like hope. The next 3 weeks were an education in patience. Catherine was building the legal framework for the fraud case. Denise was investigating Emerson. And I was playing the role of my life, the grieving widow who'd accepted her fate. Derek called me twice a week. Checking in, he said, making sure I was okay. But I could hear the real questions underneath his concern. Had I signed the documents yet? Had I spoken to any lawyers? Was I planning to contest anything? I told him what he wanted to hear, that I was overwhelmed, that I trusted him to handle things, that I just wanted to be left alone with my grief. That's understandable, Margaret, he said during one call. Take all the time you need. I'll handle everything. I'll handle everything. The words made my skin crawl, but I stayed calm. I needed more proof. The first break came on a Tuesday afternoon. Denise called me from her car. I've got something. Can you meet me? There's a coffee shop on Providence Road. 30 minutes. I was there in 20. She was sitting at a corner table, her legal pad covered in notes. When I sat down across from her, she slid a manila folder across the table. Dr. Emerson's bank records for the past 18 months. I opened the folder. Inside were pages of statements, highlighted and annotated. Look at the deposits, Denise said. Regular salary, normal transactions, nothing unusual until about a year ago. Then, starting in March, there are cash deposits. Not huge amounts, $2,000 here, $3,000 there, but consistent. Every 2 weeks. I scanned the pages. That's about $50,000 over the course of a year. $53,400, all in cash, all untraceable. She pointed to another section. Now look at this. About 6 months ago, there's a single large deposit. $25,000, wired from an offshore account. Can you trace the source? Already did. Denise's eyes met mine. The account is registered to a company called Garrett Holdings, LLC, owned by Vincent Garrett. The same Vincent Garrett your husband identified as Derek's money launderer. She leaned back. Derek paid Emerson through Garrett's company. $25,000 up front. $50,000 in installments. Probably promised more once the estate was settled. For what? Denise pulled out another document. I had the medical records reviewed. Your husband was prescribed a new medication about 3 months before his stroke. Dr. Emerson called it a preventative measure for cardiovascular health. What was it? On paper, a standard statin, Lipitor. But here's the thing. The pharmacy records show that Richard filled the prescription. He was taking something. But when I contacted the pharmacy and cross-referenced the batch number, she paused. The pills he received weren't Lipitor. My hands went cold. What were they? I can't say for certain yet. I've arranged for an independent analysis of any remaining pills at your house or at Richard's workplace. But based on the medical examiner's report and the stroke pattern, there are a few possibilities. Certain medications, if taken over time, can significantly increase the risk of hemorrhagic stroke, especially if the patient doesn't know to watch for warning signs. He murdered my husband, I whispered. Emerson helped Derek murder my husband. We need to prove it. The pills are the key. If we can find any remaining medication and confirm what's in it. I searched the house after Richard died, cleared out all his medications, his office too. There was nothing unusual. Then someone cleaned up. Denise made a note. which means they know there's evidence that could implicate them. They're being careful. I thought about it. Richard had been in the hospital for 19 days before he died. Plenty of time for someone to come into our house and remove anything incriminating. Derek has a key to the house, I said slowly. He came by a few times while I was at the hospital, said he was checking on things, making sure everything was secure. And Emerson? He was Richard's doctor. He would have had access to Richard's room at the hospital, to his belongings. Denise nodded. They've covered their tracks, but they didn't count on your husband being smarter than them. And they didn't count on you. I stared at the financial records in front of me. The evidence of conspiracy. The price tag on my husband's life. $78,400. That's what Derek had paid to kill his own father. What's the next step? I asked. We need to find those pills, or some other physical evidence that proves what was actually in Richard's system. Without that, we have circumstantial evidence. A lot of it, yes, but a good defense lawyer could muddy the waters. What about the recording? The one where Derek says, whatever it takes. It helps establish intent, but it's not specific enough. Derek could claim he was talking about something else entirely. Business negotiations, personal matters, anything. I sat back in my chair, thought about everything Richard had documented, everything he'd hidden in that storage unit. Richard was meticulous, I said slowly. He wouldn't have missed something this important. If there was physical evidence, he would have preserved it. Did he keep anything else hidden? Another storage unit? A safe deposit box? I tried to remember. Richard had shown me the key to the storage unit. Had he mentioned anything else? Then I heard the sentence that changed everything. It came from my own memory. Richard's voice that night on the patio. Check the numbers. All of them. Not some of them. All of them. I'd been focused on the financial records in the storage unit. But Richard had said numbers, plural, multiple locations. There's something else, I said. I need to go back to the storage unit. Denise raised an eyebrow. What are you looking for? I don't know yet, but Richard left me a message, and I think I've been reading it wrong. We drove to secure space together. I opened the storage unit and stood in the doorway, looking at the filing cabinet that had already given up so many secrets. What am I missing? I murmured. Denise moved around the small space, examining the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Has this cabinet been here the whole time your husband rented the unit? I assume so. Why? She pointed to the floor. Look at the dust pattern. There's a rectangle here near the back wall. Something used to sit there. Something smaller than the cabinet. I looked. She was right. A faint outline in the accumulated dust. Maybe 18 inches by 12 inches. A box? Or another container? Denise pulled out her phone and used the flashlight to examine the cabinet more closely. There's something here, on the side. She crouched down, pointed to a small strip of tape near the bottom of the cabinet. I knelt beside her. Under the tape was a piece of paper, folded small. I peeled it free and unfolded it. More numbers, in Richard's handwriting, a string of digits, 12 numbers separated into groups of 3. A combination, Denise said. But to what? I studied the numbers. Then I noticed something else written at the bottom of the paper, so faint I almost missed it. Emily knows. Emily, not Emma, Derek's daughter. Emily, I knew that name. It tugged at my memory like a half-remembered dream. Then it clicked. Emily Cross, Richard's sister. She'd died before I met him, cancer, he'd said. He didn't talk about her much. It was too painful. Emily knows, I read aloud. But Emily's dead. Maybe it's someone else, Denise suggested. No. Richard only knew one Emily. I thought back to conversations we'd had, stories he'd told me about growing up. His sister, 8 years older, who'd practically raised him after their mother died. But he used to say she was the keeper of all the family secrets, that she knew things about the Welleses that no one else knew. Where is she buried? I blinked. What? If she was important to him, if she knew things, maybe he wanted to keep something close to her memory. A safe deposit box in a bank she used? A storage space near where she lived? She lived in Charleston, died there too. She's buried in... I paused. Magnolia Cemetery. Denise was already pulling up directions on her phone. Charleston's about 3 hours from here. Want to take a drive? We went the next morning. Magnolia Cemetery was beautiful in the afternoon light. Ancient oaks draped with Spanish moss, weathered headstones dating back to the Civil War. Emily Cross was buried in a small family plot in the older section of the grounds. I stood in front of her headstone and tried to understand what Richard wanted me to find. Emily Marie Cross, 1958-2012. Beloved sister, friend, and keeper of secrets. Keeper of secrets. He'd had that engraved on her headstone. Look at this, Denise said. She was examining a small stone building nearby, a family mausoleum belonging to someone named Thornton. Not Cross. Thornton. My maiden name. Your family? She asked. I don't have any family buried in Charleston. I walked closer. I'm from Ohio originally, no southern roots. The mausoleum was old but well maintained. A brass plate on the door bore an inscription, Thornton family, established 1889, and below that, a modern combination lock. 12 digits. I pulled out the paper from the storage unit, read off the numbers, entered them into the lock. It clicked open. Inside the mausoleum was a single shelf. On that shelf sat a metal lockbox, maybe 12 by 18 inches, exactly the size of the dust outline in the storage unit. He moved it, I whispered. After he started suspecting Derek, he moved it somewhere no one would think to look. I opened the lockbox. Inside were 3 items. A small plastic bag containing 7 white pills, a vial of blood labeled with Richard's name, and a date 3 weeks before his stroke, and a USB drive. We drove back to Charlotte in silence. When we got to Catherine's office, we had everything analyzed by a team of experts she trusted. The results came back within a week. The pills were not Lipitor. They were a combination of compounds designed to suppress warning symptoms while gradually increasing blood pressure and weakening blood vessel walls. Taken over several months, they would dramatically increase the risk of a hemorrhagic stroke, while making it appear completely natural. The blood sample showed elevated levels of these same compounds. The USB drive contained additional financial records, but also something else. Richard had been recording his conversations with Dr. Emerson for months. He'd suspected the doctor was lying about his health, so he'd documented everything, including the conversation where Emerson recommended the new preventative medication that turned out to be poison. I had proof. My husband had given me everything I needed. Now I needed to figure out what to do with it. Catherine laid out our options over coffee in her office. Option 1. We go to the authorities now. Present everything. Let the police handle it. What's the downside? Derek has resources. He's already started dismantling the company's financial records, according to my sources. If he gets wind of an investigation, he'll destroy what he can, hide what he can't, and lawyer up with someone expensive enough to tie this up in courts for years. Option 2. We wait, build an even stronger case, gather more witnesses, make the evidence absolutely airtight before we move. How long would that take? 6 months, maybe more. I shook my head. 6 months is too long. Derek's getting impatient. He's been pressuring me to sign more documents, transfer more authority. He's been asking about the house, about Richard's personal effects. He's looking for something. The evidence, Catherine said. He knows Richard was on to him. He's trying to find and destroy whatever Richard left behind. Which means he'll eventually trace it back to me. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There's a third option." What? We let Derek think he's won. Completely. Give him enough rope to hang himself. She leaned forward. The reading of the will is scheduled for next month. Morrison's been stonewalling, but I have contacts in his office. The will Derek thinks is current, the one leaving everything to him, that's in Morrison's safe. But so is the real will, the one Richard updated before he died. I know. What Derek doesn't know is that I've already verified the authenticity of the new will. It's been filed with the appropriate authorities. As far as the law is concerned, it supersedes any previous version. So at the reading, Derek will expect to inherit everything, and instead, he'll receive exactly what his father wanted him to have. Catherine smiled grimly, which is, according to the new will, a single personal item and a letter explaining why. What personal item? Richard specified that Derek should receive his grandfather's pocket watch. Nothing else. The letter, of course, will explain the reasons. The fraud. The embezzlement. Everything Richard discovered. I thought about that. About Derek's face when he realized his father had known all along, had documented everything, had left him nothing but a watch and an explanation of his crimes. It wasn't enough. That's justice for the money, I said. What about Richard's life? That's where you come in. Catherine slid a document across the table. I've been coordinating with the district attorney's office. They're very interested in our evidence. They'd like to open a formal investigation into Richard's death, but they want to time it carefully. When? Immediately after the will reading. When Derek is off balance, when his finances are frozen, when his alliance with Emerson is under strain. Catherine's eyes met mine. They want to arrest them both, but they need you to do something first. What? Wear a wire. I stared at her. Derek's been calling you, pressuring you, trying to get you to sign documents, share information, give up access. If he says anything incriminating, anything at all about the money, about Emerson, about Richard, it could help secure convictions. You want me to trap him. I want you to let him trap himself. Catherine leaned back. He thinks you're weak, confused, overwhelmed. He doesn't see you as a threat. That's your biggest advantage. I thought about every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every time I'd tried to connect with Derek, tried to be a good stepmother, tried to build something real. He'd been planning to kill his father while I passed him the gravy. Yes, I said. I'll do it. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in performance. I called Derek, told him I was ready to cooperate, that I'd been thinking about what he said, how the company needed leadership, how Richard would have wanted a smooth transition. He was at my door within hours. I made coffee. We sat in the living room. The wire was hidden in my bra, a small device Denise had supplied, connected to a recording system in my purse. I'm glad you're coming around, Margaret. Derek smiled that smile. This is what Dad would have wanted. I know. I've been so confused since he died. Everything happened so fast. It was a shock for all of us. He reached over and patted my hand. But we're family. We'll get through this together. Derek, can I ask you something? Of course. The business accounts. You mentioned that some things needed to be restructured. I've been looking at the numbers, and there are a few things I don't understand. Something flickered in his eyes. What kind of things? Payments to companies I don't recognize. Garrett Holdings, for instance. What is that? A pause. Barely perceptible, but I saw it. Consulting firm. They handle some of our specialized contracts. Nothing unusual. They've received almost $4 million over the past 3 years. Another pause. Longer this time. Margaret. His voice was patient now, condescending. You're not familiar with how construction companies operate. These expenses are completely normal. If you'd like, I can have our accountant walk you through. I was a corporate accountant for 31 years, Derek. Silence. He recovered quickly. Of course. I didn't mean to imply. I'd like to see the contracts. For Garrett Holdings. Just for my own peace of mind. Derek's smile had gone rigid. That's not really appropriate. These are internal business documents. Richard left me 40% of the company. I think that makes it appropriate. Actually, he stood up. Richard's will leaves you the house and personal assets. The company comes to me, so these really aren't your concern. I stayed seated, kept my face neutral. I thought you said we were family, that we'd get through this together. We are. We will. But there are boundaries, Margaret. You need to understand. This is my company now. My father built it, and he left it to me. Whatever you think you saw in those numbers, you're wrong. And I'd appreciate it if you'd stop asking questions you're not qualified to understand. He left without saying goodbye. The recording captured everything, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. He didn't admit to anything, I told Catherine the next day. No, but he revealed his weak points. He's defensive about Garrett Holdings, about the financial records, about the will. Catherine made notes. We push on those. How? We make him think someone else is asking questions. 2 days later, an auditor from the North Carolina Department of Revenue contacted Wells Construction requesting documentation related to several large payments. It wasn't a real audit. Catherine had arranged for a colleague to make the inquiry. Completely legal, completely traceable, but just alarming enough to get Derek's attention. He called me that night. Did you do this? Do what? The audit. The Revenue Department is asking about our books. Derek, I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. His voice was different now. The mask was slipping. I know you've been digging around, asking questions, trying to undermine me. I'm a grieving widow. I don't have the energy to undermine anyone. Margaret, listen to me very carefully. If you cause problems for this company, for me, there will be consequences. Dad isn't here to protect you anymore. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Back off. Stay in your lane. Sign the documents I've given you. Take your inheritance, and leave the rest to people who actually know what they're doing. And if I don't? Silence on the line. Then, very quietly, ask Dad what happens when you don't do what you're told. He hung up. I sat there holding the phone for a long time. They thought I was finished. I wasn't. The next piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Maria Elena Gonzalez had worked as our housekeeper for 7 years. She'd been with Richard even longer, almost 12 years total. She was loyal, discreet, and, as it turned out, extremely observant. She called me 3 days after Derek's threatening phone call. Mrs. Wells, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you months ago. We met at a park near her home. She was nervous, kept looking around like she expected someone to be watching. "What's going on, Maria?" "The night before Mr. Wells had his stroke, I was working late, cleaning up after dinner. Mr. Derek came by. He didn't know I was still there." "Derek came to the house?" "Yes, late, after 9 o'clock. He let himself in with his key. He went straight to Mr. Wells's study." "What was he doing there?" Maria hesitated. "I didn't see everything, but when he left, he was carrying something, a small box, like a medicine box, and—" She swallowed hard. "And he stopped in the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, took out Mr. Wells's medication, the pills he kept on the top shelf, in the little blue container. He put something in there, replaced some of the pills." My heart was pounding. "Maria, why didn't you tell anyone about this?" Tears were streaming down her face now. "I was scared. I needed my job. And I hoped, it was nothing, that Mr. Derek was just helping with his father's medicine." She grabbed my hand. "But then Mr. Wells had his stroke, and I knew. I knew something was wrong. But I didn't say anything because I was a coward, because I was afraid." "It's okay." I squeezed her hand back. "You're telling me now. That's what matters." "There's more." Maria wiped her eyes. "After Mr. Wells went to the hospital, Mr. Derek came back. He told me to take a week off. Paid leave, he said. When I came back, everything in the house was cleaned. The medicine cabinet was empty. All of Mr. Wells's pills were gone." "Did you tell anyone else about this?" "Just my husband and Father Torres at our church. A witness, a housekeeper who'd seen Derek switch Richard's pills the night before his stroke. It was exactly what we needed." I called Catherine immediately. Maria agreed to give a sworn statement. It took time. She was terrified of Derek, terrified of losing her immigration status, terrified of being deported for causing trouble. But Catherine's colleague knew immigration law, and we were able to assure her that her testimony would be protected. By the time the will reading approached, we had everything: financial records showing years of embezzlement, bank transfers linking Derek to Vincent Garrett and Dr. Emerson, the poisoned pills and Richard's blood sample, Dr. Emerson's medical records showing a deliberate misdiagnosis, Maria's eyewitness account of Derek switching the medication, Richard's recordings of his conversations with Emerson, my own recording of Derek threatening me. It was time to spring the trap. But first, I needed to give Derek one more chance to incriminate himself. The night before the will reading, I called him. "Derek, it's Margaret. What do you want?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about backing off, about staying in my lane." I made my voice small, defeated. "You're right. I don't know what I was doing. I was just so lost after Richard died. I started seeing conspiracies everywhere. I'm sorry." A long pause. Then, slowly, his tone shifted, became warmer, patronizing. "I understand, Margaret. Grief makes us do crazy things. I want to make things right, before the reading tomorrow. Can we meet? I want to give you something. Something that Richard would have wanted you to have." "What kind of something?" "Documents, financial records, things I found after he died." I let him hear hope in my voice. Fear. "I should never have looked at them. They're not my business. I want to give them to you, and I want this to be over." Derek was quiet for a long moment. I could almost hear him calculating. "Fine," he said finally. "Where do you want to meet?" "The house. Tomorrow morning, before the reading." "I'll be there at 8. I hung up and looked at Denise, who was sitting across from me in Catherine's office. He's coming. He'll try to find out what you know, Denise said. What you have. He might try to destroy evidence. Let him try. Catherine nodded slowly. The district attorney's team will be ready. They'll be monitoring the conversation live. If Derek says anything incriminating, they can move immediately. What about Emerson? He's being watched. If he tries to run, they'll pick him up. I stood up and walked to the window. Charlotte's skyline glittered in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Derek was celebrating, anticipating his victory, counting the money he thought he was about to inherit. He had no idea what was coming. I stayed calm. I had all the proof I needed. The morning of March 15th was overcast, clouds hanging low over the city like they were waiting for something. Derek arrived at 8:03 a.m. I watched him pull into the driveway from the upstairs window, the same window where Richard used to stand every morning, drinking his coffee, watching the birds on the lake. I waited until he rang the doorbell before coming down. Margaret. He kissed my cheek like nothing had ever been wrong between us. You look better, more rested. I've had time to think. I led him into the kitchen. Coffee? Please. I poured 2 cups, handed him one. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared dozens of family dinners, where Emma had learned to eat solid food, where Richard had told me once that he considered himself the luckiest man alive. So, Derek set down his cup. These documents you mentioned, they're in Richard's study. I've been going through his things, trying to organize. I stood. Come, I'll show you. The study was exactly as Richard had left it. Oak desk, leather chair, walls lined with books and photographs, and the lifetime of a man who'd built something from nothing. Derek scanned the room with hungry eyes. What did you find? I opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder, handed it to him. He flipped it open, frowned. These are just company reports. Normal quarterly statements. What's the significance? Look at page 4. He turned to page 4. Read. His frown deepened. What am I looking at? A payment to Garrett Holdings. $75,000 for consulting services. I kept my voice casual, innocent. I didn't recognize the name, so I did some research. But I couldn't find what they actually consulted on. The records are incomplete. Derek's face had gone very still. That's proprietary information, Margaret. Client confidentiality. Nothing unusual. I'm sure you're right. I pulled out another folder. But then I found this. This folder was thicker. I'd prepared it carefully. A selection of documents that suggested I'd found something, but not everything. Breadcrumbs leading into darkness. Derek took the folder, opened it, and I watched his face change. Where did you get these? Richard's files. He kept copies of everything. I was recording this entire conversation. The wire was pinned inside my cardigan this time, a new device Catherine had provided. I found them in a box in the closet. I don't understand most of it, but some of the numbers don't add up. There's an explanation for all of this. Derek's voice was controlled. Too controlled. These are internal business documents. They're not meant to be interpreted by someone who doesn't understand our industry. I understand numbers, Derek. You understand accounting. This is construction. It's different. He set down the folder. I'll take these. They shouldn't have been in the house anyway. Dad must have brought them home by accident. Actually, I reached over and took the folder back. I've already made copies. A long, dangerous silence. Margaret, what exactly are you doing? I'm trying to understand what happened to my husband. He had a stroke. It was tragic. But these documents have nothing to do with... These documents show that $4 million was transferred out of Wells Construction into a company that, as far as I can tell, doesn't actually provide any services. That company appears to have connections to Dr. Paul Emerson, Richard's physician, and someone, I don't know who, switched Richard's medication the night before his stroke. Derek's face had gone white. That's insane. You're making this up. I have witnesses, Derek. I have evidence. What witnesses? I'm not going to tell you that. He stood up fast. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor like a scream. Listen to me very carefully. If you go to the police with this fantasy, if you try to damage my reputation or interfere with my inheritance, I will destroy you. I will take everything you have. I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in poverty and shame. Just like you destroyed your father? My father destroyed himself. Derek's voice was cold now, all pretense gone. He got old, got soft, didn't have the stomach for what needed to be done. The company was stagnating under his leadership. Someone had to step up. And that someone was you. Yes, that someone was me. I built Wells Construction into what it is today. I made the deals. I took the risks. And Dad, he laughed bitterly. Dad wanted to give it all away. Charity, scholarships, employee profit sharing. Do you have any idea how much money he was going to waste? So you killed him. I protected my family's legacy. By committing fraud, by conspiring with his doctor to switch his medication, by murdering him. Derek leaned across the desk. His face was inches from mine. Prove it. I held his gaze without blinking. I already have. Something in my voice made him hesitate. Made him look at me, really look, for the first time since Richard's funeral. What do you mean? I mean, this conversation is being recorded. The district attorney's office has been listening since you walked through my door. I smiled. And you just confessed to everything. For a moment, Derek stood frozen, processing, calculating. Then he lunged at me. I was ready for him. I'd been ready since the moment I found Richard on that bathroom floor. I stepped back, grabbing the edge of Richard's desk for support. Derek grabbed my arm, fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to bruise. Where's the recording? He was shaking me now. Where is it? Too late. The front door crashed open. Police, get on the ground! Derek released me and spun around. 2 officers were already in the study doorway, weapons drawn. Derek Wells, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and murder. You have the right to remain silent. They handcuffed him while he screamed about lawyers, about false arrest, about the ruination I'd brought upon myself. I stood by Richard's desk and watched them take him away. Then I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and cried. Not for Derek, for Richard, for the son he'd loved who'd turned out to be a monster, for all the years that had been stolen from us. But mostly I cried because it was over. The first part of it anyway. The will reading happened that afternoon. The arrest had been kept quiet. Catherine had arranged that with the DA's office. Derek would be processed and arraigned, but the news wouldn't break until after the reading was complete. Which meant Vanessa still showed up at Morrison's office expecting to become a multimillionaire. She was already seated when I arrived. Her face was perfectly composed, not a trace of concern about where her husband might be. She probably assumed he was meeting with the family's regular lawyer, doing damage control before the reading. James Morrison was at the head of the table. He was an older man, distinguished, with the kind of face that suggested absolute propriety. I'd come to understand, through Catherine, that Morrison had genuinely not known about Derek's schemes. He'd been Richard's lawyer for 2 decades and was horrified to learn what had happened under his nose. "We'll begin in a few minutes," Morrison said. "We're waiting for one more party." Vanessa checked her phone. "Derek should be here any moment." "We're not waiting for Derek." The door opened. Catherine Park walked in. Vanessa straightened. "Who is this?" "This is a private family matter." "Mrs. Park is representing Mrs. Thornton Wells," Morrison said. "She has every right to be here." "Representing her for what?" No one answered. We sat in silence for several minutes. Vanessa grew increasingly agitated, checking her phone every few seconds, texting furiously, getting no response. Finally, Morrison cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances, we'll proceed without Mr. Wells. The reading of the will is a legal requirement and cannot be delayed indefinitely." "What circumstances?" Vanessa demanded. "Where is my husband?" "Mrs. Wells, your husband is currently in police custody. He was arrested this morning on multiple felony charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and murder." The color drained from Vanessa's face. That's not possible. There's been a mistake." "There's been no mistake." Catherine spoke for the first time. "The evidence against your husband is comprehensive. He will be formally charged within the hour." Vanessa turned to look at me. Her eyes were wild. "You did this, you—" "Mrs. Wells." Morrison's voice was firm. "Please, let's proceed." He opened his briefcase and removed 2 documents. One was a bound legal document, the will. The other was a cream-colored envelope. "Richard Theodore Wells executed this will on February 3rd of last year, superseding all previous versions. I have verified its authenticity with the county clerk's office. It is legally binding." He began to read. The first few paragraphs were standard: legal language, declarations of competency, identification of heirs. Then came the substance. "To my wife, Margaret Thornton Wells, I leave the entirety of my personal assets, including our home at 47 Lakeview Drive, all bank accounts and investment portfolios, and 40% ownership of Wells Construction Company." Vanessa gasped. "That's not—" Richard promised. "To my granddaughter, Emma Marie Wells, I leave a trust fund to be managed by my wife until Emma reaches the age of 25, valued at $2 million and intended for her education and future well-being." Vanessa's mouth was working, but no sound came out. "To the employees of Wells Construction, I leave a profit-sharing plan funded by 60% of the company's annual profits for the next 10 years, to be distributed according to tenure and performance as evaluated by my wife and the board of directors." Morrison paused, looked at Vanessa. "To my son, Derek Thomas Wells, I leave one item only: my grandfather's pocket watch, which has been in the Wells family for 4 generations. I trust he will understand its significance." Vanessa finally found her voice. "That's not possible. Richard's will, the one we saw, it left everything to Derek. The house, the company, all of it. This is fraud. This is—" "The document you're referring to is from 3 years ago. Richard updated his will after discovering certain irregularities in his son's behavior." Morrison picked up the envelope. "Additionally, Richard left this letter to be delivered to Derek at the reading. Given the circumstances, I'll read it aloud." He opened the envelope. "Derek," Morrison read, "if you're hearing this, it means my suspicions were correct. I spent the last year of my life hoping I was wrong about you, hoping that the son I raised, the boy I loved more than my own life, hadn't become a thief and a liar. I hope you can imagine how much it hurt to realize the truth. I built Wells Construction with my own hands, poured my blood and sweat and soul into it. And you who had every advantage, every opportunity, every ounce of my love, you decided to steal from me, to betray me. And I suspect, though I pray I'm wrong, that you've decided to do something far worse. I don't know what your plan is. I don't know how far you're willing to go, but I know this. You will not get away with it. Whatever happens to me, Maggie will find the truth. She's smarter than you think, stronger than you know, and she loves me, something I'm not sure you were ever capable of. I'm leaving you grandfather's watch because it belonged to a man who built something with integrity, who believed that hard work and honesty were the foundations of a good life. I hope someday you'll understand what that means. If not, if you've gone too far, done too much to ever come back, then know that I loved you anyway. Until the very end. I loved the boy you used to be, and I mourn the man you've become. Dad. The silence in that conference room was absolute. Vanessa was crying now, ugly, gasping sobs that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the realization that her life was unraveling. Morrison set down the letter. There's one additional item. He picked up a manila envelope and handed it to Vanessa. Richard left instructions that this be delivered to you as well. Vanessa tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I watched her read it, watched her face go from confusion to shock to terror. What is it? I asked. Catherine answered for her. A list of every offshore account Derek opened in Vanessa's name over the past 3 years. Every shell company where she's listed as a director. Every piece of evidence linking her to her husband's crimes. Vanessa looked up at me. Her mascara was running. Her perfect composure had shattered completely. I didn't know, she whispered. He never told me what. You signed the documents, Mrs. Wells. Catherine's voice was cold. You accepted the payments. You lived off money that was stolen from your father-in-law, and you sat in this room expecting to inherit an estate that your husband murdered for. She stood up. The district attorney will want to speak with you. I suggest you find a lawyer. 2 officers appeared in the doorway. They'd been waiting in the hall. Vanessa didn't resist. She stood, shoulders shaking, and let them lead her away. The room was empty now except for Morrison, Catherine, and me. Morrison gathered his papers slowly. His hands were unsteady. Mrs. Thornton Wells, I owe you an apology. Richard was my client for 20 years. I should have seen what was happening, should have protected him. You couldn't have known. Perhaps. But I should have asked questions. When Derek started calling about the estate, when he seemed so eager to push things through. Morrison shook his head. I'm sorry. I failed him. You're not the one who should be apologizing. I stood and offered my hand. Thank you, Mr. Morrison, for making sure Richard's final wishes were respected. He shook my hand gravely. Then he left. Catherine and I sat alone in the conference room. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it. Empty, relieved, sad. I looked at the cream-colored envelope still sitting on the table. Richard's last words to his son. I thought I'd feel triumphant, like I'd won something, but I just feel tired. That's normal. Victory in cases like this doesn't feel like victory. It feels like survival. Does it get better? Eventually. The trial will be difficult. There will be press coverage. Derek's lawyers will try to paint you as the villain. Vanessa will probably turn on him to save herself. It's going to be ugly. Catherine paused. but you'll get through it. You're stronger than you think." I looked at her, this small, fierce woman who'd helped me tear down everything my stepson had built. "Thank you," I said, "for believing me when no one else did." The numbers didn't lie. Catherine smiled. "You taught me that." The trial took 14 months. Derek was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. Dr. Emerson was charged as an accessory. Vanessa, in exchange for her cooperation, pleaded to lesser charges and received probation. I testified for 3 days. The prosecution walked me through every document, every recording, every piece of evidence Richard had left behind. Derek's defense attorney tried to paint me as a gold digger, a manipulative widow who'd fabricated evidence to steal her stepson's inheritance. The jury didn't buy it. Derek Wells was convicted on all counts. He received 35 years without the possibility of parole. Dr. Emerson received 20 years. I watched them both being led away in handcuffs. Derek didn't look at me. Emerson was crying. After the verdict, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. They wanted quotes, reactions, tears. I gave them nothing. I went home, sat on the back patio, watched the sunset over the lake. Richard had loved this view, had stood here thousands of times, coffee in hand, watching the birds and the water and the changing colors of the sky. "We did it," I said to no one. To Richard, to the empty air. "I found the truth, just like you asked." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. I sat there until dark. 2 years have passed since the trial. Wells Construction is thriving. I kept the company as Richard wanted and hired a management team I trust. The profit-sharing plan has transformed employee morale. Last quarter, we completed the largest project in company history, a community center in the neighborhood where Richard grew up. They put a plaque on the building. His name is there, along with the words he used to say to everyone who worked for him. "Build something that matters." Emma visits me every other weekend. She's 6 now, bright and curious, and completely unaware of what her parents did. Vanessa has custody, but she's trying to rebuild her life, and she knows better than to poison Emma against me. I don't know if Emma will ever understand what happened, if she'll hate her father, or me, or the world that let all of this happen. I can only give her what Richard would have wanted: love, stability, the belief that she's more than where she came from. Maria Elena still works for me. She got her citizenship last year. I went to the ceremony and cried when they handed her the certificate. Catherine Park retired from law. We have lunch once a month. She's writing a book about the case, with my permission, and she says it's going to be a bestseller. Denise Monroe is still investigating things that people don't want found. Last I heard, she was helping a widow in Atlanta who suspected her late husband's business partner of fraud. Some patterns never change. I think about Richard every day, about his warnings that I almost ignored, about the trust he placed in me when everyone else, including his own son, had betrayed him. He knew I would find the truth. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's the hardest part sometimes. Not the grief, not the loneliness, but living up to the faith someone had in you when they're no longer here to see it. I've learned a lot in the past few years. I've learned that the people closest to you can cause the greatest harm. That masks are worn not by strangers, but by family members who've learned exactly how to look like love. I've learned that patience is a weapon. That staying calm, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment, these are not signs of weakness. They're the tools of someone who refuses to be destroyed. I've learned that money reveals character, not having it, wanting it, the lengths people will go to get it. Richard built a fortune with his hands and his integrity. Derek tried to steal it with lies and poison, and in the end, the truth was worth more than either of them. Mostly, I've learned that grief doesn't end. It just changes shape. It becomes something you carry, something that weighs you down on bad days and lifts you up on good ones. It's the price you pay for loving someone. And I'd pay it again, every day, for the years I had with Richard. Last week, I went to his grave. It was early morning, the kind of soft gray light he always loved. I brought flowers, white roses, his favorite, and I sat on the bench next to his headstone for a long time. I keep wondering if I did the right thing, I told him. Exposing Derek, sending him to prison. He's your son, no matter what he did. Part of you must have hoped for a different ending. The wind stirred the trees around the cemetery. A bird landed on a nearby branch, tilted its head at me, and flew away. But I think you knew who he was, and you trusted me to see it too, to do what needed to be done. I touched the cold stone of his headstone. I hope I made you proud. There was no answer, of course. There never is. But when I left the cemetery that morning, I felt lighter, like something had finally settled into place. Richard had asked me to check the numbers, all of them, and I had. The final tally was this: 1 conviction for murder, 2 lives destroyed by greed, a company saved, a granddaughter protected, a truth unearthed from the place where it had been buried, and a widow who learned that the quiet strength she'd always carried, the precision of an accountant, the patience of a woman who'd survived loss before, was exactly what she needed to survive again. If you're still listening, I have a question for you. Is there someone in your life wearing a mask? Someone whose kindness feels calculated, whose smile doesn't quite reach their eyes? Pay attention to the numbers. Not just money, although money always tells a story, but the small inconsistencies, the explanations that don't quite add up, the moments when their story doesn't match what you've seen with your own eyes. Trust yourself. Trust what you notice. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. You're smarter than they think you are, stronger than they know, and you're not finished. Not by a long shot. One more thing. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from the state penitentiary, from Derek. I didn't open it for 3 weeks. When I finally did, I found 2 pages of cramped handwriting. Apologies, explanations, justifications. A plea for forgiveness that felt more like a demand. He said he'd been pressured, influenced by bad people, made mistakes, but didn't deserve to spend his life in prison. He asked if I could use my influence, my position at the company, my relationship with Richard's memory, to advocate for his early release. He called me Mom again. For the first time since Richard's stroke, I read that letter twice, then I burned it. Some things aren't meant to be forgiven. Some debts can't be repaid, and some masks, once removed, reveal a face you never want to see again. Derek made his choices. Now I'm making mine. Every day I wake up in the house that Richard built. I drink coffee on the patio he designed. I manage the company he created with his own hands. And every night, before I go to sleep, I look at the small brass key on my nightstand, the key to that storage unit where Richard hid the truth, and I remind myself of something. The evidence never lies, but people do. The key is knowing which numbers to check. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If you've ever trusted someone who turned out to be wearing a mask, You're not alone. And if you're going through something hard right now, something that feels impossible to solve, remember, patience is power. Evidence is everything, and you're stronger than they know. Like this story? Subscribe for more true accounts of betrayal, justice, and the strength of people who refused to give up. And one more question before I go. Have you ever uncovered someone's true face? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Supplemental scenes, the missed anniversary. 3 months before Richard's stroke, we celebrated our wedding anniversary. I'd planned a quiet dinner at home, candles, his favorite wine, that Sinatra album we danced to on our first date. Richard came home late from the office. He looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. I asked if everything was okay. Just business, he said. Derek and I had a disagreement about the direction of the company. What kind of disagreement? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he took my hands in his. Maggie, if I asked you to do something for me, something that might seem strange, would you trust me? Of course. I've been thinking about the future, about what happens when I'm not here anymore. Richard, don't talk like that. I'm 64 years old. I've built a good life, a successful company, but I haven't been careful enough about protecting it. He squeezed my hands. I need to make some changes, update my will, put some things in writing, and I need you to keep it private. Don't mention it to Derek or Vanessa. Not yet. Why? Because I'm not sure who I can trust anymore. His eyes met mine. Except you. I'm sure about you. That was the night he told me about the storage unit. The first hint that something was wrong. I didn't understand then. I thought he was worried about mortality, about getting older, about all the things men think about when they realize they can't live forever. I understand now. He was trying to protect me, even then. Even before he knew for certain what his son was planning. Richard Wells was the most decent man I've ever known, and his son murdered him for money. The hospital vigil, 19 days. That's how long Richard lived after his stroke. 19 days of sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, talking to him even though the doctors said he couldn't hear me. 19 days of hoping for a miracle that never came. Derek visited every afternoon, regular as clockwork. He'd sit with Richard for exactly 1 hour, then leave to handle business matters at the office. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Now I know he was using those visits to clean up his mess, to remove evidence, to make sure that when Richard died, there would be nothing left to trace. On the 15th day, something strange happened. Richard opened his eyes, just for a moment. Just long enough to look at me, really look, with an expression I'll never forget. Fear, desperate, pleading fear. His lips moved. I leaned closer, trying to hear. Check, he whispered. Check the... Then his eyes closed. His monitors beeped steadily. The moment was gone. I told the doctors. They said it was common. Patients emerging briefly from deep comas, random synaptic activity, nothing meaningful. But I knew better. Richard was trying to tell me something. Check the numbers. He said it that night on the patio. He tried to say it again in the hospital. And I almost didn't listen. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd understood sooner. If I'd found the storage unit while Richard was still alive. If I'd been able to save him. But I can't think like that. Not anymore. I did what he asked. I checked the numbers. And I found the truth. Vincent Garrett. During the trial, I learned more about Vincent Garrett than I ever wanted to know. He was 63 years old, a former CPA who'd lost his license in the early 2000s for irregularities in his client accounts. He'd reinvented himself as a consultant, specializing in creative financial structures. In plain English, he helped wealthy people hide money and evade taxes. Derek had found him through a friend of a friend. Their arrangement started small. A few $1,000s moved here, an expense categorized there. Nothing that would trigger an audit. But over time, the amounts grew. So did Garrett's fee. By the time Richard discovered what was happening, Garrett had helped Derek siphon nearly $4 million out of Wells Construction. The prosecution offered Garrett a deal: testify against Derek, explain exactly how the scheme worked, and receive a reduced sentence. He took it. His testimony was devastating. He described late-night phone calls, encrypted emails, cash payments. He explained how Derek had created shell companies with meaningless names: Sunrise Consulting, Mountain View Partners, Coastal Development LLC, that existed only on paper. He also confirmed that Derek had paid Dr. Emerson through one of these shell companies. Mr. Wells was very specific, Garrett testified. He said the payment was for medical services that needed to stay private. He didn't give details, and I didn't ask. That's how these things work. What did you think he was paying for? The prosecutor asked. Honestly, I assumed it was plastic surgery. A lot of my clients have personal medical procedures they want to keep quiet. Garrett shrugged. I never imagined. Never imagined what? That he was paying someone to kill his father. Derek's defense attorney objected. But the damage was done. Garrett received 5 years. He's currently in a minimum security facility in South Carolina. I don't think about him much. He was a tool, an instrument. The real evil came from Derek. But I hope, wherever he is, he understands that some deals aren't worth making. Emerson's confession. Dr. Paul Emerson cried during his testimony, not because he was sorry, because he'd been caught. He'd practiced medicine for 32 years, had thousands of patients who trusted him with their lives, and he'd betrayed that trust for $75,000. The prosecution walked him through every step of his crime. How Derek had approached him at a medical conference. How they'd discussed Richard's situation over drinks at a hotel bar. How Emerson had agreed to prescribe a medication that would, over time, increase Richard's risk of stroke. I told myself it wasn't murder, Emerson said. I wasn't poisoning him, just adjusting his treatment, creating conditions where nature might take its course. But you knew the likely outcome. I knew it was possible, not certain. And when Richard Wells had his stroke, when he lay dying in the hospital, what did you tell his wife? Emerson looked at me. His eyes were red, his face hollow. And I told her these things just happen sometimes. The courtroom was silent. Dr. Emerson, the prosecutor continued, how do you feel about that now? He didn't answer, just sat there crying while his lawyer asked for a recess. I wanted to feel satisfied, vindicated. Instead, I just felt sick. This man had taken an oath to do no harm, and he'd killed my husband for money. The pocket watch. After the trial, I received Richard's personal effects from the evidence locker. Among them was his grandfather's pocket watch. It was a beautiful piece, gold casing, Roman numerals, an inscription on the back. Time reveals all truths. J.W., 1892. James Wells, Richard's great-grandfather, the man who'd started the family tradition of building things with your hands. Richard had treasured this watch his entire life. He'd shown it to me on our wedding day, told me it would go to Derek someday. Now it sat in an evidence bag, tagged as an exhibit in a murder trial. I took it out. held it in my palm, felt the weight of it, the history. Time reveals all truths. Richard must have known, when he wrote his will, that those words would take on a different meaning, that Derek would receive this watch not as a gift, but as a judgment. A reminder of everything he'd destroyed. I haven't decided what to do with it. Part of me wants to keep it. A reminder of Richard, of the values he stood for. Part of me wants to give it to Emma. Let her grow up with something that represents her grandfather's legacy. And part of me, a small, petty part I'm not proud of, wants to send it to Derek in prison. Let him hold it every day and remember what he lost. Time reveals all truths. I wonder if he understands that now. Catherine's advice. A year after the trial, I met Catherine for lunch at our usual spot, a small Italian restaurant near her office. She was officially retired now, working on her book, consulting occasionally on cases that interested her. She seemed lighter, happier than I'd ever seen her. "You look good," she said when I sat down. "Peaceful." "I'm trying." "How's the company?" "Profitable, growing. I hired a new CFO last month. She's excellent." "And the rest of it? The grief, the anger, all of it?" I thought about how to answer. It's still there, underneath everything. I don't think it ever fully goes away. I took a sip of my wine. But I've learned to live with it, to carry it without letting it define me. Catherine nodded slowly. That's the best any of us can do. We ate in companionable silence for a while. Then she said something I've thought about many times since. I've spent my career dealing with cases like yours. Families torn apart by money, by betrayal, by the kind of evil that hides behind a smile. And I've seen how people respond. How? Some of them break. The weight of it crushes them. They spend the rest of their lives bitter, angry, unable to trust anyone again. She set down her fork. And some of them, like you, find a way through. They take the pieces of what's left and build something new. I don't feel like I've built anything. You saved a company that employs hundreds of people. You're raising a granddaughter who might have grown up thinking her father was a hero. You told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. Catherine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's building, Maggie. That's what it looks like. I didn't know what to say, so I just squeezed her hand back. Thank you, I said finally. For everything. Don't thank me. Thank that stubborn accountant inside you who refused to let the numbers lie. She was right. That's the lesson, I think. When everything else falls apart, when the people you love betray you, when the world doesn't make sense, when you don't know how to keep going, there's something you can hold on to. The truth. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't bend for powerful people. It doesn't disappear just because someone wants it to. The truth is patient. It waits. It reveals itself to those who know how to look. And in the end, the truth is all we have. Final reflection. I'm 61 years old now. I've lived through 2 marriages, 2 losses, more grief than I ever thought I could bear. I've seen the best of people and the worst. I've learned that family isn't always blood, and blood isn't always family. But I've also learned this. We're stronger than we think we are. When Richard died, I believed my life was over. I believed I was just a widow, just a stepmother, just a woman who'd been pushed aside by people with more power and fewer scruples. I was wrong. I was an accountant, a professional, someone who'd spent 30 years learning how to see the truth in numbers, how to find patterns that others missed, how to build cases that couldn't be dismantled. And when I needed those skills most, they were there. I stayed calm. I gathered evidence. I waited for the right moment. And I won. Not because I was lucky, not because I was powerful, but because I refused to give up. That's the lesson I want to leave you with. Whatever you're facing, whatever impossible situation has you convinced there's no way out, don't believe it. Look for the evidence. Find the people who will help you. Build your case. And when the time is right, strike. They think you're finished. You're not. End additional scene. The confrontation that almost was. There was a moment, about 2 weeks after Richard's funeral, when I almost confronted Derek directly. I'd been going through Richard's papers in his study, not looking for evidence yet, just trying to organize his life, figure out what needed to be done. I found a folder of old photographs. Richard and Derek as a child. Derek's first day at Wells Construction. Family Christmases, birthday parties. Derek had been such a beautiful child. Bright-eyed, curious, full of questions. Richard used to tell me stories about teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with homework, watching him grow into a young man. What happened to that child? I was sitting there, holding those photographs, crying, when Derek let himself in. He found me in the study, saw the photos, saw the tears. "Margaret, are you okay?" I looked up at him, at this man who had, though I didn't know it yet for certain, killed his own father, who was standing there with concern on his face, pretending to care. Something in me wanted to scream, to throw the photos at him, to demand an explanation, to tear the mask off his face. But I didn't. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had served me well in my career. The knowledge that emotional reactions rarely lead to good outcomes. "I'm fine," I said. "Just going through some memories." Derek walked over, looked at the photos I was holding. "I remember that day," he said, pointing to one of them. A younger Richard lifting a small Derek onto his shoulders at a construction site. Dad took me to work with him, showed me everything, told me that someday it would all be mine. He said it with a small smile, a wistful tone, like it was a beautiful memory, like he hadn't twisted that promise into justification for murder. "It was a good day," I said carefully. "Yeah." Derek set the photo down. "Listen, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just came by to drop off some documents. Signatures we need for the transition. Leave them on the desk. I'll look at them later." "Of course." He pulled a folder from his bag, set it on Richard's desk. "Take your time. No rush." He left without another word. I didn't touch those documents for weeks. By the time I did, I'd already been to the storage unit. Already knew what I was dealing with. But that moment in the study, watching Derek hold his father's photograph, hearing him talk about the past, like it meant something to him, that's when I understood something important. Some people are very, very good at pretending, and the only way to beat them is to be even better. The day of the arrest. I've described the morning of Derek's arrest from my perspective, but there's more to the story. When the police took Derek out of my house, I watched from the window as they put him in the back of a police car. He wasn't fighting anymore. His shoulders were slumped, his face blank with shock. But just before they closed the door, he looked up. Our eyes met. And in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen from Derek before. Recognition. He finally understood who I was, not the stepmother he'd dismissed, not the widow he thought he could manipulate, but the person who had dismantled every lie he'd ever told. He opened his mouth, said something. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I knew what he was saying. "How? How did you figure it out? How did you find the evidence? How did you beat me? I didn't answer, just stood there, silent, until the police car pulled away. Later, after the arrest was public, reporters started calling. Friends and acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. How did you know? The answer was simple. I checked the numbers, all of them. Richard's final gift. In the weeks after the trial ended, I received a package from James Morrison. It was a small wooden box, beautifully carved, with a brass latch. Morrison's note explained that Richard had given it to him years ago, with instructions that it be delivered to me only after the matter with Derek was resolved. Inside the box was a letter, and something else. The letter was brief. Maggie, if you're reading this, it means you found everything I left for you. It means you were stronger than Derek expected, stronger than I had any right to hope. I knew what I was asking when I told you to check the numbers. I knew I was putting you in danger. But I also knew there was no one else I could trust. No one else with the skills, the patience, and the heart to do what needed to be done. You saved me, Maggie, not my life. That was probably beyond saving by the time I wrote this. But my legacy, my company, the things I built and the people who depend on them. You protected them all. There's something else in this box. Something I want you to have. I bought it the week after we met. Before our first date. Before I even knew your last name. I saw it in a shop window and I thought, that's for her. That's for the woman who's going to change my life. I was going to give it to you on our 10th anniversary. We didn't quite make it, but I want you to have it anyway. Wear it. Think of me, and know that wherever I am now, I'm proud of you. All my love forever, Richard. Underneath the letter was a ring. Not an engagement ring. Something different. A simple gold band. Delicate, with a single sapphire. My birthstone. I put it on. I've worn it every day since. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Richard's death, I drove out to the lake house. It wasn't our primary home, just a small cabin we'd bought a few years into our marriage, a place to escape the city, to spend weekends watching the water and forgetting about everything else. I hadn't been there since Richard died. It hurt too much. But that day, something drew me back. The cabin was exactly as we'd left it. Dusty, quiet, full of memories. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching things Richard had touched, sitting in chairs where we'd sat together. On the bedside table, I found a book. Richard's bookmark still in place. He'd been halfway through a biography of Winston Churchill, the master of stubbornness, he used to call him. I picked up the book, opened it to the marked page. In the margin, Richard had written something, just a few words, in his familiar handwriting. When you can't fight, wait. When you can fight, fight to win. R.W. I closed the book, held it against my chest. He'd been preparing me, even then. Even in the margins of a biography, during quiet weekends at the lake, he'd been planting seeds, tips for survival, rules for war. I stayed at the cabin that night, watched the sunset, listened to the water, and I made a promise. I would live the life Richard would have wanted me to live. I would protect the things he'd built. I would be strong and patient and ruthless when necessary. I would check the numbers, all of them. The question. So here we are, 24,000 words later. A story of betrayal and patience and justice served cold. And now I want to ask you something. What would you have done if you'd found yourself in my position, married to someone you loved, stepmother to someone you tried to love, suddenly suspicious that nothing was what it seemed. What would you have done? Would you have confronted them, demanded answers, made accusations you couldn't prove? Or would you have done what I did? Stayed quiet, gathered evidence, built a case so airtight that when the moment came, there was no escape. It's easy to say you'd do the right thing, harder to actually do it. But I'll tell you this, if there's a lesson in my story, it's this. Patience wins. Evidence is everything. And the truth, the real truth, documented and verified and impossible to deny, is the most powerful weapon you'll ever hold. They thought I was just a widow. They were wrong. And if you're reading this, if you're facing something impossible, something terrifying, something that makes you feel small and powerless, remember what I did. Stay calm. Gather proof. Wait for your moment. Then strike. You're not finished. I promise you that. Like and subscribe for more true stories of betrayal, justice, and the strength of people who refused to give up. Comment below. Have you ever uncovered someone's true face? I'd love to hear your story.